Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really, really honored to be here today. I want you to remember three things from this session, because we're going to talk about digital sovereignty. So I want you to understand how the EU defines digital sovereignty, because we know there are all sorts of definitions of digital sovereignty floating around. And I want to make sure that at this end, you know, okay, there are many definitions, but this is the definition that is used by the EU. Also, I want you to know if they are judging these different definitions, then it's important to know how they scale. So how do they scale? How do you know where you are? And that's the third thing I want you to know from this session, is that you know how to measure the digital sovereignty of your own infrastructure. So, my name is Emiel Brok. I am Global Sovereignty Ambassador. Isn't that a beautiful title? Woohoo! I'm really happy with that. Basically, what it is what I do is I travel around the world and I talk about digital sovereignty, and I try to explain what it is not. And we just here on the hallway already had a discussion like, yeah, but sovereignty has got some political intonation as well. Then we call it digital autonomy, or we call it resilience, or you can call it basically whatever you want. But it's important that we use, if you're lobbying, like I do often, for open source already for more than 20 years, but nowadays it's really more a lobby for digital sovereignty as well. And that's an easy one for me, because digital sovereignty and open source cannot be separated. You cannot have the right level of digital sovereignty if you are not using open source and open standards. I think that's really important to know. And besides my work for Susan, who is paying my bill, which is very nice, I also am a lobbyist, and not just representing Susan, I'm representing at the moment 42, I love that number, so we cannot hire new companies, but we have 42 members of the DOSBA. And the DOSBA is the Dutch Open Source Business Alliance. So here in France you have the fantastic CNNL. In the Netherlands we thought, that's a good idea, we have to have that as well. So we founded a year ago a foundation, and as I said, we have now 42 members, so I'm not just representing myself, I'm just not only representing SUSE, but representing the open source industry in the Netherlands. And we had a presentation here yesterday from my colleague as well, from Sebastian Reibel, from Appel. Because as you saw yesterday, the national organizations are then represented in European. So we lobby in Brussels for open source and digital sovereignty. And I have an invite for you all. If you want, we have a conference coming up end of this month in my home country, in the Netherlands, in Utrecht to be exactly. Very beautiful city in the middle of the country. Very easy to reach from here. I can tell you from experience, coming over here this Monday, you just jump on the train here and you're in about 4 hours in Utrecht. And we have a conference there. And if you want to represent the open source industry in Europe, then this is the place to be. Okay, now let's go to the topic of today, digital sovereignty. And when we talk about this, it was a nice experiment in the past 2 weeks, or maybe even a little bit over a week, that we created a letter where we asked the European Parliament, all municipalities, all governments within Europe to make sure that open source first is being used when you talk about procurement sessions within governments. In other words, open code, public money, open code, public money. And we started that experiment, a letter, about a week ago, and we now already have more than 65 this morning open source companies, open source organizations. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I see some people nodding here as well. There are quite a few French companies as well. Because what we want is we want to show strength together. we want to show that the open source industry is really strong, and we want to make sure that everyone in the parliament understands that you cannot get to a digital future, to a strong Europe on digital side, without open source. So this letter, and there are a couple of QR codes passing by. I know with security reasons, so maybe you have to be careful, but I and my team created all the QR codes, so I stand for them. But if you don't trust it, just Google, or if you want to do a Fediverse version, make sure that you are doing it in a safe way. But if you and your company are not yet here, then feel free to have a look. And it might not just be good for the whole group, it might be good for your own marketing as well. If you are an open source project or a smaller company and you want to be visible, your logo will be the same size as the company that I represent. And talking about my company, I'm really, really proud of the company. And there are some nice numbers here. But what I'm really proud of is that we actually are the first open source company. We were founded really based on Linux, actually a translation of Slackware, back in 1992. So if you do some calculation, that means that about a year after Linus Torvalds put out his message, that he created something that, oh, that's interesting. A year later, in Germany, there were 4 gentlemen who created this company. And does anyone actually know what SUSE, it used to be an abbreviation of something. Any idea? Any idea what it is? SUSE stood for, we don't use it anymore, but it was Systeem- und Softwareentwicklung. So that's basically system and project development. And that's the original abbreviation of SUSE. But we are now with around 2,500 people. We are really all over the world. But what's really important nowadays, of course, is that we are a European company. So our official headquarters is in Luxembourg. The majority of the people work in Germany. I myself, in the Dutch office, we have around 100 people, but altogether there are 2,500 people. So it's really quite a nice company. And I work for them now for 11 years, and I really, really like it. And there's all these digits, that's nice. But what makes me really proud regarding open source is that in the years that I work for SUSE, it happened now 3-4 times that we bought a proprietary tool and we said, well, this does not exist yet in the open source world. One example is, if you look at Kubernetes management platform, there were all sorts of tools, but there was no good observability tool. So what we did is, we looked in the market and we found a observability tool, and it was proprietary, so we bought it and made it open source. So how open source can you be as a company? I think that really, really underlines it. That really makes me proud to be a very little part in this big company. But talking about digital sovereignty, digital resilience, it's nice that we all feel within our own church that it's super important that open source is there. But to make sure that we could really say something about what the average customer of us or the potential customer of SUSE thinks about this topic, we did a research. We did a research earlier this year, and it's not a super scientifically built up, but we interviewed more than 300 IT leaders, and they were spread out over 5 countries, including France. And they were representing 13 different industries. So in other words, we did a fair, quite good research. And now I have a question for you, because we asked the people that we investigated, that we researched, that we surveyed. If you look at digital resilience, is that an important topic for your organization at this moment? Any guesses? How many people, which percentage of the people we asked said, yes, digital resilience, digital autonomy, digital sovereignty, whatever you call it, is important to us? Any guesses? 80%, I hear there. 35? Okay, I hear different numbers, but the answer actually is 98. So we did not discriminate in who we ask. It's not just only SUSE customers or open source lovers. It's 98% of the people that we asked said we understand that digital sovereignty is important and it's a priority for us today. And the other percentage there, it's already given here, is the 94%. So if you ask the combination between digital resilience and open source, is that important or very important? And it was on a scale of 7. 94% said that it is super important. If you want to know more about this research, go here. Have a look. Another QR code. I have a few more coming up for you, by the way. So keep your mobile phones there if you want to know a bit more about digital resilience and open source. But all the results are here. But I think these two really stood out, and it helps us all to motivate whoever we want to motivate in our direct surrounding that digital resilience and open source cannot be separated. All right, now to the topic. The topic of digital resilience and what is used, how it is defined. What you hear sometimes is that they just start talking about the example. I think everyone knows it here, right? Preaching for their own church about the International Court of Justice in The Hague, in my country, where it was switched off, where the main prosecutor was switched off from using Microsoft Office 365. So how important is that in your digital resilience strategy? Is that an important part? And we also know that there is sovereignty washing happening, and to make sure that all these different definitions that are floating around are captured, I'm really happy that 18 October last year, the EU came with a definition. So now we can at least, we're on the same language if we talk about digital sovereignty. And that's really great about this framework. So if you look at the Cloud Sovereignty Framework, I highly recommend you to download it if you want, because it's only 6 pages and the font is not super small or something. The language is not super legal. I was even able to understand it, which just, you can just download it, read it, and about 30, 45 minutes, and you know exactly where it is. But I'll save you that time because I will take you through it a little bit. So what's important, what's in this cloud framework, how the EU defined digital sovereignty is there is a definition of the where. So what's the physical location of your IT infrastructure? There is the how. So is the infrastructure that you are using, is it based upon open technologies, open source software, open standards? And there is the who. In other words, the people that are touching your machines, or that if you are an IT provider and you want to know who is the support engineer you're talking to, from which country, under which laws does the person that you are talking to reside? Is that person, does he have to act under the Cloud Act? By the way, does somebody know Cloud Act? Because we hear a lot about the Cloud Act. And I think everyone knows about the Cloud Act, right? But do you also know that Cloud Act, actually, the word cloud there is an acronym? So it's not just about the cloud. That's a very tricky thing in this abbreviation, because it says cloud, but it's, I have to say it now right, the C is clarifying, the L is lawful, and the O is an interesting one, because the O in Cloud Act stands for overseas. In other words, sometimes people say, is it really so that with the Cloud Act, an American company can be forced to give me my data, to give the data of my customer, if it is an American entity? Well, as you understand from the O for overseas, the Cloud Act is specifically made for overseas. And the U and the D are use of data. So Cloud Act from now on, don't think only about the cloud. It's also for all the data everything you have, also on-premise or on any device. If you have it in edge devices, it doesn't matter. It's not just for cloud. That's was an eye-opener for me the first time when I heard it. Is it an eye-opener for anyone here? Were you aware of this? Yeah, I see some people quite pale now, thinking, uh-oh, that means that not only this was seizable, but all the data is. And you're right. Okay, in the beginning I said I want you to remember 3 things from this presentation. And one of them was the different levels, how you can evaluate where you are for your own, or if you have a customer that is using software, how sovereign they are. This is the definition that the EU made. So it goes from sea level 0, and we call it on purpose 0 and not sea level 1, because you don't deserve a 1 if you are in this level, because it basically means that you have no sovereignty. In other words, you have totally no control. All your data, all the power resides in a non-EU country. So that's sea level 0. Then there is sea level 1 that talks about a jurisdictional sovereignty. In other words, that's really about the legal side of it. Sea level 2 is about your data. That at least you can say the data, you have indirect control over your data, but it's through non-EU parties. And then we're coming into the green area, that's sea level 3, where you talk about digital resilience. And it's not our definition, it's a definition that the EU made. And finally, there is sea level 4, as you can see. And that really means that you have full control, and all the people that touch your data, that touch your machines, are EU residents. By the way, if anyone has questions, comments, complaints, then feel free to shoot at any time. I have exactly 1 chameleon to give away. So who impresses me the most today with questions, comments, then I might throw. I don't have as many beavers as Collabora had yesterday. I still have my bag of chameleons at home. But make sure that if you are interactive, we will definitely get you a chameleon, because they're quite loved. Not just by people, also by dogs, by the way. But yeah. All right. The second thing I wanted you to remember from this session is the weighting. That's wrong, actually. This is not the weighting. This is the objectives. So these 8 different elements that the EU defined, what is a contribution to how sovereign you are. And then, as you can see, I'm not going to mention them all out loud, but how I translate it is basically like, imagine that you're going to build a house. The first thing you do is you go and you look for a piece of land to build that house. And you can make a similarity, sort of the same thing for your IT infrastructure. So you picture a piece of land and, okay, we're going to build a house now there. That means that this piece of land is in France, so it is under the legislation and the guidelines and everything from the French government. Maybe even we're in Paris here, so maybe even it's part of municipality rules and regulations. If you would have chosen another piece of land, that would have had a huge consequence for all the elements you pick after that. Because the second element, if you then have your piece of land, you need to go and get a blueprint created out of your IT infrastructure. And that's what we call in this these objectives from the EU, is operational sovereignty. And a very important element then, it's actually the highest weighting, is the 20%. Is a supply chain. So you have your piece of land and you're going to build a house now there. So you need materials. And these materials, you want to make sure that they do not contain any poison materials, or that they are making the people ill that live in this house later on. So it's super important that you know where the materials come from. And that's also what the EU said for your IT infrastructure. It said 20% of the importance is to supply chain sovereignty. And you have your house, and you know where the materials come from, your house is there. Now you need to make sure that it's safe. So then you need to have your security in order as well. So there is where you go and put in your security, and then your house is built, you are sitting there, but you want to make sure that the house is there in 10 years as well. So therefore, you need to make sure that it is sustainable. And therefore, the EU said also environmental sustainability is an important, not the most important, only 5%, but still an important element in your sovereignty. So these 8 elements, compared to building a house, are playing an important role, the role in what the EU defined as sovereignty. Any questions on that? Yes. Hi.
Would a proprietary EU solution have a higher rating than an open source non-EU solution with the supply chain sovereignty?
It's a very good question. The answer is it depends. But if you look at the hierarchy here, you see that the element of having non-EU partners is only in the in sea level 2, while the jurisdictional, so the licensing and all, is more in sea level 1. So I would say that having a, but that's also my personal preference. You can better have open source, because actually it's a very good point, because we're having a discussion at the end of the day, and this is a great topic to discuss, because open source is global. We all know that. You cannot have boundaries to open source. So is it then okay if a Russian developer works on your software? Well, as long as it's open source. Are you okay with Americans working on your code? So it's a very good question. The answer is not super binary, but in the definition of the EU, it's better to have a open source from anywhere in the world, but it really depends on the governance around this open source project. Okay. Oh, yes, hi.
Hi, I work for a blockchain industry, probably the only person here from blockchain, but what about infrastructure that has no control? I don't think it's can be kind of like put in any seal. It's either like you can't put it in seal 0 because it doesn't have an owner, the blockchain as a network itself. But seal 4, I mean, there are critical non-EU dependencies in every blockchain. So, and another question that would follow up on that is that what is the trade-off between if the organizations have to choose the infrastructure, would they go for truly decentralized and censorship resistance, but something like, I represent Ethereum, I work in Ethereum, on Ethereum blockchain, so we do not have great reputation out there, right? So would they go rather for that because it's truly decentralized, or would they rather go for an open source tool that might have an influence because, I don't know, there's like, you can buy a seat there, for example, for like, you know, big corporations, they buy seats at foundations. So basically, do the organizations prioritize current optics or long-term benefits?
Very good question as well. A blockchain technology, so a technology that does not have an IP, that does not have a owner, is more or less not, as you said, under the control. So if you would look at these different sea levels, I really. It's a very good question. I don't know the answer to that, to be honest, from this point of view. I know blockchain technology, obviously, but I love to come back to it. And I think you deserved a comedian with that question for sure. And anyone here? Because it would be great if there is interaction. Anyone an idea how like open source technology, we do have the copy left and the copy right. So there is somewhere a governance. In blockchain, there is no governance. Anyone? There are some experts here in the room.
I think I'm the only expert, probably. But
Yeah, I love to.
That
oh
would
yes.
be kind of the same for each type of decentralization, like email, for example, but also
Fair enough. Yeah.
yeah, but also all types of peer-to-peer networks,
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess.
It's a very good question. I'll come back to that. This afternoon at 4 o'clock, we have a closing session here, closing discussion. We'll take both questions and we will go and find the answers there. Okay, in the opening of this session, I said I want you to remember 3 things. The third thing is, how can you measure your own level of sovereignty? Well, what you can do is go and do a self-assessment. We created a self-assessment. We, in this case, is SUSE. We created a self-assessment. You can just go there, and if you go to this website, you can hover over the answers, and you can see, all right, for the infrastructure that I'm talking about, that I'm responsible for, I would answer sea level 3 for this, 2 for this, 4 for this, and then it has quite a clear explanation. So feel free to go there. What's important to know is that it's super privacy friendly. If you go and do this self-assessment, we do not get any data from who does it. We don't get any data from the result. So the downside is that if you ask me now how many people did this and how what's the average outcome according to the EU Cloud Framework, we don't know because we don't track it. And all the data, if you fill in these, it's actually 32 questions, so it's about 20 minutes work, and you will then get the answer. We don't get the answer. You will only give your data. Your name, address, and telephone number, email address to us if you want it. You have to proactively give us your data, and then we can have a conversation about it. So feel free to go there. Do this self-assessment, and in the opening of this session, I said I want you to remember 3 things. Well, you ask questions that we even don't have the answer to now. So one element was the different levels. The sea levels. The second element was what contains a digital sovereignty environment according to the EU. And the third, how you can measure your own level. Well, with 27 on the clock, we're covered all these 3 things. So I hope this was an explanatory session for you. And I really thank you all for your time. And have a wonderful rest of your morning.